You're here because you want to get a real handle on things, right? To understand what matters without getting lost in the weeds. That's
Yeah.
exactly what we're up to today. We're taking a deep dive into something called mindset.
And when we say mindset, we're not just talking about, positive thinking. It's more specific.
Right.
It's really about what you believe about your own basic abilities, your talents. Are they set in stone,
Right.
or can you actually grow them?
Exactly. And the name you always hear linked with this is Carol Dweck. She's a professor at Stanford now.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently, what first got her thinking about this was way back in sixth grade. Her class, they grouped students by IQ scores.
Wow. Sixth grade.
Yeah. And get this, even simple things like cleaning the blackboard. Only the quote unquote smart kids were allowed to do it. Think about the message that sends.
Oh, absolutely. It just screams, you either have it or you don't, doesn't it? That
Sit-
idea of fixed ability. And that experience, it seems, really pushed her to explore how these beliefs, these mindsets, shape how we tackle learning challenges,
Hmm.
our whole sense of potential, really.
So that's what we're digging into. What is the difference between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset? How does it actually show up in life?
Yeah, and we'll look at the research, too,
Yeah,
the evidence, but also, some of the critiques and questions that have come up.
definitely. Want to give you a really solid, rounded view? Okay, so let's unpack this fixed mindset.
Right.
What are we really talking about?
Okay, so at its heart, a fixed mindset is believing that your qualities, intelligence, talent, that kind of stuff are just fixed. They're traits you're born with.
Like you get a certain amount and that's your lot.
Exactly. And if you have this view, success feels like it's purely down to having that innate ability.
Mm-hmm.
Effort? Well, effort can almost seem like a bad sign
How so?
because if you have to try really hard, it might mean you don't actually have the natural talent.
Okay.
So the main goal becomes looking smart and avoiding failure like the plague. Because failure isn't just a setback, it feels like proof you're not smart enough.
So it's less about just being negative and more about this fundamental belief that your potential has a ceiling.
Precisely. It's a core belief about how abilities work.
Gotcha. Okay, so what does that actually look like day to day? Can you give us some examples of fixed mindset behavior?
Sure. Think about a student. Maybe they avoid taking that really challenging advanced math class. Why? Because they're scared they won't do well, and that would make them look, well, not smart.
Right. Protect the image.
Exactly. Or in a discussion, they might hang back, worried about saying something dumb. You might even see people choosing easier majors.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, just to guarantee they feel competent instead of going for something they're passionate about but seems, harder.
That fear of looking incapable really drives things, huh? What else?
Well, they might be really hesitant to ask for help, like going to a professor's office hours
Mm-hmm.
or getting a tutor. That feels like admitting weakness, like admitting you don't have the innate ability.
Mm-hmm.
And feedback, even constructive feedback, it can feel like a personal attack,
Yeah.
something to be dismissed or even resented.
Instead of useful info.
Right. They might also shy away from big, messy research projects or anything that crosses disciplines. Again, the fear of not being smart enough.
Okay.
And if things go wrong, it's often about blaming external stuff.
Yeah.
The test was unfair. The teacher didn't explain it rather than thinking, okay, what could I do differently?
Well, it's the static view of themselves, and sometimes it even makes things competitive.
It can, yeah. Seeing someone else succeed can feel like a threat to your own status if you believe ability is a fixed pie.
Wow, okay. That really lays out the potential downsides. So let's flip it. What about the growth mindset? What's the core idea there?
Growth mindset is basically the opposite belief. It's the idea that your talents, your abilities, they aren't fixed. They can be developed through hard work, good strategies, learning, getting input from others.
Yeah.
Basically through dedication and persistence. Intelligence isn't some lump you're given. It's something you can cultivate.
And effort in this view.
Effort is key. It's not a sign you lack talent. It's the engine of improvement. It's essential. And mistakes, they're not failures to be ashamed of.
They're opportunities.
Exactly. Opportunities to learn, to figure out what went wrong, to get better.
So someone with a growth mindset, they wouldn't run from a challenge.
Quite the opposite. They tend to embrace challenges. They see them as a chance to stretch themselves, to learn something new.
Okay.
When they hit roadblocks, they don't just give up. They persist. They try different approaches. They really value the effort
Or
involved.
feedback.
They usually seek it out. They see it as valuable information to help them improve, not as some judgment on who they are.
Makes sense.
And seeing others succeed.
Yeah.
It's more likely to be inspiring, maybe something to learn from, rather than feeling threatening. That great little word often linked to this, yet.
Yeah, yes, the power of yet.
Right? I don't understand this yet, or I can't do this yet. It just reframes everything as a process, not a final state.
It's so simple, but yeah, really powerful. It just adds that possibility of future change. And it's worth remembering, right, that we aren't just one or the other all the time in every situation.
Oh, absolutely not. It's much more of a spectrum, and it can vary wildly depending on the area of your life.
Like how?
Well, you might have a real growth mindset about, say, cooking. You love trying new things, you learn from disasters, you believe you can get better.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe with, I don't know, public speaking, you lean more fixed. You think, oh, I'm just not good at that. And you avoid it.
Right, right. Or even within one area like work, maybe you feel growth-oriented about technical skills, but fixed about leadership potential.
Exactly. It's context dependent.
Okay, that's a really helpful distinction. So we've got the basics, fixed versus growth. Let's go back to Carol Dweck. You mentioned a 1988 paper. What was the core concept she introduced then?
Yeah, that was really foundational. She introduced what she called implicit theories of intelligence and personality.
Implicit theories.
In the academic world, you'll see that term, or implicit beliefs, self-theories, used pretty much interchangeably with mindsets.
Okay.
Essentially, these are the deep-down, often unconscious assumptions we have about whether our own qualities are changeable or fixed.
And then these ideas really hit the mainstream with her book in 2006.
That's right, Mindset, the New Psychology of Success. That book took the research out of the journals and made it accessible, and it really, really took off. People in education, business, sports, they all started talking about mindset.
One thing she warns about strongly is praising kids for being smart. That always surprises people. Why is that a bad idea, according to her?
Well, it seems like a good thing to do, right?
Okay.
But Dweck's research suggests it can backfire. It can accidentally foster a fixed mindset. If you tell a child, wow, you're so smart, they might start thinking, okay, I need to keep looking smart. Then they might avoid challenges or situations where they risk making mistakes, because making a mistake would threaten that smart label.
So they play it safe to protect the label.
Exactly. They might stick to things they know they can do easily.
So what's the alternative? How should we praise effort or learning?
She argues it's much better to praise the process. Praise their effort, their strategies, their persistence when things get tough, their willingness to take on challenges, how much they seem to enjoy learning.
Focus on what they do, not what they are.
Precisely. That helps build a growth mindset, where they see that effort and tackling hard things are how you actually get smarter. She has a great quote about wanting to give kids a gift.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, something like, teach them to love challenges, be intrigued by mistakes, enjoy effort, and keep learning. That fosters a kind of confidence that lasts.
That makes a lot of sense. It puts the control back in their hands. And she's continued this work. You mentioned something more recent from 2017.
Yes, she's been working on a bigger picture, a kind of unified theory connecting these mindsets to motivation, personality, social development,
Yeah.
how it all fits together over time. It's really about the deeper psychological foundations.
Interesting. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. How does this play out in the workplace, in leadership, in teams? A fixed mindset sounds like it could be pretty limiting there.
Oh, definitely. A leader with a fixed mindset. They might be hesitant to take risks or encourage new ideas because they're afraid of failure, afraid it reflects badly on their fixed abilities. And teams can get stuck too. They might avoid difficult projects, maybe resist feedback, struggle to adapt when things change. It can really stifle innovation and learning.
And in today's world, everyone talks about VUCA, right?
Yeah.
Volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. A growth mindset feels almost essential for that kind of environment.
Absolutely essential. In a VCA world, you have to be learning constantly. Sometimes unlearning old ways, relearning new ones. Leaders with a growth mindset are just better equipped for that. They see change and challenge not just as threats, but as opportunities to adapt and grow. They understand that improvement is a continuous process.
We saw some work by Jennifer Jordan and Heather Cairns-Lee. They talked about how leaders frame challenges. What was their point there?
Their point was really powerful. How a leader frames a challenge, the story they tell themselves and others about it, drastically affects their thoughts, feelings, actions, and how they interact with their team.
So a fixed mindset leader sees a problem as
a threat to their competence, maybe, leads to anxiety, avoidance. But a growth mindset leader might frame that same problem as, okay, here's a chance for us to learn something new, develop skills, make the organization better. completely changes the energy.
That framing makes a huge difference. And they had some practical advice too, didn't they? For individuals wanting to cultivate growth mindset and for leaders trying to foster it.
Yes. For individuals, they suggested 3 things. 1, commit to deliberate practice. Really focus on improving specific things. 2, learn to manage defensiveness and that feeling of defeat when you hit setbacks. Don't let it shut you down.
Easier said than done sometimes.
For sure. And 3, maybe the most important, listen to that fixed mindset voice in your head and talk back to it. Challenge those limiting beliefs actively.
Talking back, I like that. And for leaders building this in their teams.
They had practical steps there too, like actually talk as a team about what triggers fixed versus growth mindsets for people, just building awareness. Also, look at your meetings. Do they feel like places where it's safe to admit mistakes and learn growth, or places where everyone has to look perfect, fixed?
Good question to ask.
And finally, leaders need to watch out for accidentally setting people up to fail. Putting someone in a situation where they're almost guaranteed to struggle can really reinforce a fixed mindset. Avoid that set up to fail syndrome.
Really concrete, useful stuff for leaders. Okay, now let's look at the science a bit more closely. We know mindset interventions are popular, especially in education. What does the evidence actually say? That What Works Clearinghouse report looked at college students, right?
Yes, the Institute of Education Sciences, What Works Clearinghouse, reviewed studies on growth mindset interventions for post-secondary students. They looked at 15, found 6 that met their rigorous standards.
And the results?
They found potentially positive effects on academic achievement. The improvement index was plus 13 percentile points.
Potentially positive, so not a slam dunk.
Well, it indicates a positive trend across those studies, but it doesn't guarantee statistical significance in every single one. So yeah, potentially positive is the cautious language they use. A hint of something positive for grades.
Okay, a hint for grades. What about other things, like keeping students in college? Did it help with enrollment or staying enrolled?
On those outcomes, college enrollment and what they called progressing in college, like completing credits or coming back next semester, the report found no discernible effects.
None.
Pretty much. The improvement index numbers were tiny, basically 0 or even slightly negative. So based on the studies they reviewed, these interventions didn't seem to move the needle on students actually sticking with college.
Interesting. And what did these interventions typically involve? Were they intensive?
Actually, no. They're often aimed at first-year students, sometimes done online, sometimes in person, individual or group, and usually quite brief, like around 30 minutes total.
30 minutes?
Yeah. Typically, they'd introduce the idea that intelligence isn't fixed, that it can grow. Then often there was some kind of reflection exercise, getting students to think about how they could apply that idea to their own studies.
Huh. So a short intervention shows maybe some effect on grades, but not retention. That's interesting. Now, we mentioned earlier this whole area isn't without its critics. What are some of the main scientific debates or criticisms about Dweck's work or its application?
Well, one big one is replication. Some researchers have had trouble replicating the original findings. Timothy Bates in Edinburgh, for example, reported running studies trying to find the effect and not finding it.
Right. If others can't consistently get the same results, it raises questions.
Exactly. It leads to questions about how robust the effect is and under what specific conditions it actually appears.
And there were also concerns about how easy it is to translate this into real classrooms, right?
Yes. Nick Brown, who's known for looking closely at methodology in psychology, made that point. He argued that if the effect is really delicate, only showing up in tightly controlled lab settings, how useful is it for teachers dealing with, the chaos of a real classroom?
Mm-hmm.
He also raised some statistical questions about some earlier papers, which, to be fair, Dweck has responded to and acknowledged.
And there's a worry it could be sort of oversimplified, turned into just another label for kids.
That's a definite concern, that the nuance gets lost and it becomes, are you growth or are you fixed? Maybe even used for grading attitudes, which some educators like Matt O'Leary find troubling.
Yeah, I can see that.
And David James raised a related point that focusing too much on individual mindset might let us off the hook for addressing bigger issues. Like blaming a student's lack of success solely on their mindset ignores things like poverty or poor schooling, systemic problems. It risks individualizing failure.
That's a really important caution. And didn't a big study in England find little effect?
Yes, the Education Endowment Foundation ran a large randomized controlled trial, thousands of students. They found that the growth mindset training they implemented didn't lead to noticeable gains in literacy or numeracy compared to the control group.
Hmm. So it highlights the difficulty of making these things work effectively at scale in real schools.
It really does. And it suggests that maybe the way the ideas get translated into interventions sometimes oversimplifies the original research. And, it's crucial to remember, growth mindset doesn't mean talent doesn't matter.
Right. It's not saying anyone can be Einstein with enough effort.
Exactly. It both matter. A growth mindset is about believing you can develop your abilities through effort, not that innate talent is irrelevant.
Okay, so it's complex. Which leads to maybe a more nuanced way of thinking about this. It's not just you have one or the other.
Right. That's where the perspective from the Neuroleadership Institute is helpful. They suggest we don't really have a fixed or growth mindset as a permanent personality trait.
We don't.
Not in a fixed way, no.
Huh?
Instead, we use both mindsets. We shift between them depending on the situation.
Okay. They had that analogy. Not a switch, but
A dimmer switch. I love that analogy.
Yeah, me too. Explain that.
It's not binary, like a light switch being either on growth or off fixed. It's more like a dimmer. You can dial your growth mindset up in some situations, and it might be dialed down in others.
Okay, so give me an example.
Well, like we said before, maybe you're learning French, you're excited, you practice, mistakes are mindsets dialed way up. But then you have to give a presentation to the CEO. Suddenly you feel like, oh God, I'm terrible at this, I'm going to bomb. Fixed mindset might creep in, dialed way down, same person, different context.
That feels much more true to experience. It's not about labeling yourself, I'm a fixed mindset person.
Exactly. It's about noticing, okay, in this specific area or this situation, I seem to be defaulting to a fixed view. My thoughts are limiting me here.
And the goal then is self-awareness.
Self-awareness, definitely. Recognizing those moments, those triggers, and then consciously choosing to lean into a more growth-oriented approach where it matters to you. Thinking, okay, how can I learn from this? What steps can I take?
Okay, so let's try and pull this all together. We've looked at the core idea. Fixed mindset sees abilities as set, growth sees them as developable.
Right. Through effort, learning, persistence.
And we've seen the potential upsides of growth mindset resilience, embracing challenges, especially important in learning and leadership.
But we've also waded into the science. Some evidence suggests potential benefits, like for academic achievement in certain studies, but also real challenges with replication. Questions about effectiveness in large-scale interventions, and the crucial need for nuance. It's not a magic bullet.
Definitely not. And talent still matters. Effort still matters. It's the combination and the belief in development.
Exactly. Understanding that complexity is key.
So knowing about your own mindset tendencies and maybe recognizing them in others, it seems like a genuinely useful tool for personal growth, for work.
Yeah, I think so. It gives you a framework.
So here's something for you, the listener, to chew on. Think about one specific area in your life right now. Could be a skill, could be a relationship, could be a challenge at work. Is there a place where you feel a bit stuck?
Right.
Where you might be operating with more of a fixed mindset?
Where you hear that voice saying, I'm just not good at this, or it's too hard.
Yeah. And just consider, what if you consciously tried to dial up the growth mindset dimmer just a notch in that one area? What might happen if you embraced the yet? What new approach could you try? And maybe just notice today, where do you feel more growth-oriented and where do you feel more fixed? It can be pretty revealing.
Absolutely. And if this has sparked your interest, definitely check out the sources. Look up Carol Dweck's work. There's a lot more there. This deep dive is really just scratching the surface of how our beliefs shape what's possible.